At the party, the bastard secretly drugged my wine. I was hot all over and finally managed to escape. But he unexpectedly ran into a big shot in the circle. "Help me. I will agree to anything you ask." I grabbed his sleeve and begged while gasping. I didn't expect that he had skin hunger. He put his arm around my waist and led me into the room. "You said that yourself." 1. I was invited to the party as usual, but my father asked me to bring my illegitimate son George, whom he had just adopted. "Brother, this is my first time in such an occasion." George acted awkwardly and whispered in my ear. I turned my head, glanced at his unpresentable appearance, curled my lips, and said nothing more. The lights in the lobby were dazzlingly bright. The orchestra was playing melodious and soothing tunes, and I was holding a wine glass and chatting with the guests with ease. I thought George was harmless and posed no threat, so I did not take extra precautions. But soon after I drank a glass of wine, my body gradually became hot and my breathing became difficult. I made an excuse to leave and went to the bathroom to wash my face and clear my head. Suddenly, his eyes went dark and he was knocked unconscious by someone from behind. When I opened my eyes again, I was being carried on someone's shoulders. It was then that I realized George had spiked my drink and set a trap for me. Judging from the floor, this should be the hotel where the banquet was held. It was obvious that this was George's first time doing this, so he only arranged for one person, although he was a strong man who was difficult to deal with. I suppressed my physical discomfort, closed my eyes, and continued to pretend to be dizzy, ready to wait for the opportunity to escape. After a while, the burly man opened the door of a room and threw me on the bed. He turned around and made a phone call, probably to get the job done. I took advantage of his unpreparedness, stood up carefully, picked up the decorative copper pot on the table, and smashed it on his head. After a muffled sound, the strong man fainted on the spot. I didn't pay close attention to his reaction, but immediately wrote down the house number and ran out of the room. It was still early and the party had not yet ended, so there was no one in the corridor. My attention was focused on escaping just now. Now that I am temporarily out of danger, the pain from the hit on the back of my head gradually becomes more obvious. The uncomfortable feeling of burning sensation in my body did not subside at all, but became even more uncomfortable. I held onto the wall, moving with difficulty, and took out my phone to send a message to my childhood friend Charles. "Room 1803, help me deal with it. I will explain it to you later. The problem I need to solve right now is obviously a physiological one. The blow just now has already consumed all the strength I have. Now I even have trouble holding my phone. Just when I was almost completely unable to stand, I bumped into someone head-on. 2. I looked up and met a pair of eyes as deep as an ink lake. The man in front of him was wearing a well-tailored shirt with a suit jacket casually draped over his arm. He had a handsome and fair face with clear and sharp features. He exuded a subtle nobility, yet a slightly sharp air. But there were emotions in his eyes that I couldn't understand. My breathing hitched for a moment. It's Timothy, a big shot in the circle that everyone fears. Timothy? I was overwhelmed by the pain and could not care less. I reached out and grabbed his sleeve, looking up and panting, begging, "Help me. I will do anything you ask." As soon as I finished speaking, I slowly slid down the wall due to exhaustion. Timothy suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist, then put his arm around my waist and helped me up. He raised his hand and held my chin. His thumb lightly brushed the corner of my lips, and his strong chest pressed against me. "You said that yourself." Timothy lowered his head and rubbed his face against my neck, his warm lips brushing the side of my neck. I was a little suspicious, but I couldn't think too much about it under the current circumstances. The elevator door opened and closed, and in the claustrophobic space, even the breathing sounds were clearly amplified. I was burning hot all over, but I also felt cold, and I couldn't help but lean towards Timothy. The arm on my waist suddenly stopped and the elevator arrived. Timothy put his arm around my waist and led me into the penthouse suite. 3. The next morning, I was awakened by a series of message alerts. I leaned up a little and tried to sit up to reach the phone on the bedside table, but something restrained my waist, so I fell back helplessly. I turned my head and saw Timothy sleeping soundly beside me. This stern face, which usually only appears in news reports, now seems to have taken off all armor and defenses, and looks gentle and comfortable. Everything that happened last night exploded in my mind in an instant. I gritted my teeth, closed my eyes, and tried not to think about it. The phone rang again. I pushed myself up a few inches on the bed and finally got it. All the messages were sent by Charles. He's fine, I've taken him away. What happened that made you want to blow his head off? Okay, I just lied to him and he confessed. Isn't George really too bold to be so reckless? As I expected, I sneered and continued reading. Don't reply? Oh, it's probably inconvenient for you now. Okay, I'll contact you tomorrow morning. It's already 9 o'clock. It's time to get up. Damn, are you a beast or did you meet a beast? It's 10 o'clock and you still haven't replied to me. I'm telling you, I have a temper too, Ronald. You left this person with me all night without any explanation. You weren't kidnapped, were you? If you don't reply to me, I will call the police. I really called the police. The last one was just sent. No, if you don't reply to me, I will hand him over to your sister. Telling your sister will be more effective. I quickly replied to him to stop him, saying that it would be the end of me if he told my sister. I'm fine, you can deal with that person. Don't be too harsh. I'll handle the rest. As soon as I clicked send, a hand suddenly reached out and grabbed my waist. I was so scared that my phone fell on the bed. For the next moment, my chest was forced against Timothy's head. This posture is a bit strange. I wonder if other people who encounter such a thing will feel the same warmth as us the next morning? The parties involved remained quiet, as if nothing had happened. Timothy. It would have been fine if I didn't speak. But once I opened my mouth, my voice became so hoarse that I even startled myself. I coughed lightly to clear my throat and continued softly. You don't have to pretend now that you're awake. Timothy raised his head and opened his eyes. His black pupils were clear and bright, not at all like the confusion when he just woke up. On the contrary, it seemed as if he had been awake for a long time. Thank you for last night. I will keep my promise and agree to whatever you ask for. I know you are not short of money, but I don't have anything else besides money. You have. Timothy leaned over and rubbed his head against my stomach. I straightened my back instantly, and based on his reaction last night, I had a guess in my mind. You still have yourself. Timothy's voice buried itself in my stomach, sounding muffled but exceptionally nice. But that's not the point. The next second, his words confirmed my previous guess. I have skin hunger. Really, I didn't know how to react for a moment. This symptom obviously couldn't be cured immediately like a common cold, and the words of comfort I tried to express sounded dry and poor. Looking down at the top of his head, I raised my hand and rubbed it gently. Before I could retract my raised hand, Timothy's next words made my mind go blank. Date your love with me. 5. I jumped out of bed with a cry of surprise, looked at him in shock, and asked back, "Wah, what?" Timothy sat up. The movement involved the strong and powerful muscles in his upper body. The lines of his abdominal muscles were smooth and sexy, and there was an invisible sense of oppression, and then down along the mermaid line, the unpleasant memories of last night came flooding back to me, and I unconsciously looked away and swallowed. Timothy suddenly chuckled. I looked up and followed his gaze, and I saw the pink marks on my body. I grabbed some clothes and put them on to block his view. Timothy looked at me steadily and repeated, "Date with me." I looked at him with some embarrassment. You said you would agree to any request I make. There was a hint of grievance in Timothy's tone. That's true, but... I sighed, the words of refusal on the tip of my tongue. But I continued, but this is our first meeting, right? You don't know me, and I don't know you. Besides, this was an accident. If we get together just because of this, wouldn't it be a bit hasty? After saying this, I felt an inexplicable sense of guilt. After all, I was the one who made the promise and then went back on it. I watched Timothy carefully, watching for his reaction. The once frosty, handsome face now revealed a look of distress. The air was silent for a moment. How about this? I gritted my teeth. Contact me if you need anything. The meaning of this statement is already very clear, and I am not so shameless as to say it too bluntly. I found a piece of paper and a pen, wrote down my contact information, and handed it to Timothy. He stared at the words on the paper and didn't reach out to take it. I thought he was not satisfied with this handling method, so after hesitating for a moment, I asked cautiously, "Or do you have any other requests?" Timothy stared at the paper for a while, then took it. "No, that's it. Go away." Now I feel even more guilty. Before leaving, Timothy sat on the bed, staring at the paper with some disappointment. I sighed, turned my eyes away, and walked out the door without looking back. 6. Tonight at the old place, you must give me an explanation. After seeing the message from Charles, I had no choice but to drive there on time. The bar is bustling with light and shadow. In the booth on the second floor, Charles was already having a great time drinking with a few of his friends. "Ronald, you're dead. I'm telling you, you're dead." When Charles saw me, he rushed over and choked me. I grabbed his arm, pulled it apart, and said with disgust, "Roll, roll, roll. There's a smell of alcohol. Where the hell did you go last night?" Charles said with a resentful look on his face. "I was really disappointed that I couldn't get in touch with you for a long time. I almost called your sister and told her that you were kidnapped." "Don't. My sister would be so worried if she knew." "What did you do with that guy last night?" "He got beaten up and sent to work at the docks. I think he looks pretty strong." I nodded and sat down, giving Charles a look, signaling him to send the others away. After everyone left, I picked up the glass of wine on the table and drank it all without saying a word. Charles is indeed my best friend. He can tell at a glance that something is wrong with me. "Did something happen to you?" "Wait a minute. I'll think about what to say." Hearing me say this, Charles unconsciously tensed up and sat up straight. After thinking for a moment, I decided to introduce the protagonist first. "Do you know Timothy?" "Yes, I know him, but he doesn't know me." After saying that, Charles suddenly widened his eyes and looked at me in shock. "You weren't with him last night." I nodded, confirming his answer. "Oh my God!" Charles exclaimed, and lifted my arms to check. "You didn't get chopped into pieces by him?" "No, I'm fine." "Haha, it's almost the same actually." "Wait a minute. The drug that bitch gave you last night was..." Charles suddenly fell silent, stopped what he was doing, and pointed at me. "Then you're not with Timothy. What are you pointing at?" I slapped his hand away irritably. He nodded again with despair. "What the hell?" Charles roared loudly, slamming the table so hard that the cup on top bounced up and shook. Fortunately, it was noisy enough around and no one paid attention to this side. While greeting, he walked around several times and suddenly stopped. "Then he can't be with you for nothing, right? Did you promise him something to persuade your sister not to compete with him for that project?" I shook my head in denial, stood up and walked over, my eyes wandering casually around the dance floor downstairs. How is that possible? I never interfere in the company's affairs. Besides, my sister can't be persuaded by just anyone what she wants. I propped my arm on the armrest, raised my head with my hand and said in distress, "He said he wanted me to date him." "What?" Charles was stunned for a moment, then said, "Damn it, you won't agree to that." "No." I shook my head. "But wait." I suddenly stopped and raised my hand to point to the edge of the dance floor on the first floor. Charles looked in the direction I pointed. "Damn it, George, that bitch. Haven't you settled your score with him yet? Let's go." 7. George was having a great time chatting with some of his friends. Suddenly, someone grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up. "What are you doing?" George looked at Charles in confusion and horror. "Who are you? What are you doing? Should I be the one asking you this?" I raised the corners of my lips and looked at him, and said lightly, "What did you do?" George changed his panic expression and smiled at me. "Brother, you were here too. What a coincidence." But the way he was picked up by Charles was really funny. I sneered and headed to the bathroom. As I passed the bar, I took the bartender's ice cutter. "What? Let me go. Let me go. The bathroom had already been prepared by Charles in advance, and there were only 3 of us there at the moment. Stop yelling. I'll let you go now. George was still struggling, but Charles suddenly let go. The former didn't react in time and fell to the ground in embarrassment. Charles sneered, turned to me and said, I'll watch from outside. Don't overdo it. No. As soon as Charles left, George stood up. Brother, let's talk. What's the point of bringing me here? I smiled, didn't answer, and walked forward step by step. George was forced into a corner by me, looking out with vigilant eyes. No one will come. Before I could raise my hand, George quickly raised his hand in front of him in a defensive posture. Are you afraid that I will retaliate against you? How is that possible? George suddenly roared. Then he realized that his voice was too loud and lowered his voice. I didn't do anything. It was you, brother, who brought me here for no apparent reason. Baffling? I asked back, fiddling with the ice pick in my hand. You should have thought of this moment when you drugged my wine. Before I could finish my words, I suddenly grabbed one of his hands, picked up the ice pick and smashed it on his hand. Bright red liquid flowed down along with George's screams. He felt pain and weakness, and his body slid down the wall and squatted down. I also squatted down and looked at him. Unexpectedly, this man was still not honest. He raised his uninjured left hand and suddenly punched me on the head. But the force was not strong enough to cause any substantial harm to me. I curled my lips and smiled. Ah! I almost forgot you're left-handed. George glared at me fiercely, with beads of sweat oozing from his forehead. Don't think I'm afraid of you. I ignored him, looked at his left hand and continued. That must be the hand that did the bad thing. Just as I was about to attack his other hand, his pupils suddenly widened. He looked behind me and shouted, Help me! Timothy! Help me! Timothy? I turned around in confusion and met the face I had just seen this morning. Timothy frowned slightly, looking down at him with an interrogative look. I stood up and hid the bloody ice pick behind me. Then he smiled and greeted him. What a coincidence! After saying that, I glared at Charles, who was standing behind Timothy. Charles quickly waved his hands and mouthed, I didn't stop you. Timothy! Timothy, you must save me. George rolled and crawled towards Timothy. Timothy took a half step back slowly, glanced at the person on the ground, and asked in disgust, Do we know each other? George's face froze. Charles suddenly stepped forward, pushed George aside without leaving any trace, pointed at him, and said to Timothy, Timothy, Ronald was harmed by this person last night. After hearing this, Timothy's frown deepened visibly. I glared at Charles again, not understanding why he said that. But since I've already been seen, I'll just go for broke. Timothy, this is my personal matter. Please step aside for a moment. But Timothy had no intention of avoiding it. Instead, he took a step forward and grabbed my wrist. He took the ice pick from my hand, handed it to Charles, and said, I took the person away. As he spoke, Timothy's hand that was holding my wrist slid down and interlocked his fingers with mine. The warm touch of my fingertips was so clear that I could even feel the thin calluses on his palms. The memory of this hand soothing somewhere last night suddenly came back. My brain paused for a moment, and then I suddenly heard Charles's flattering answer. Okay, what's good about it? Timothy raised his leg and was about to walk out, and I immediately stopped him. Wait, where are you taking me? He turned back and whispered in my ear. I'll contact you if I need you. I recalled what I had said and my face turned red. Timothy took a half step back and said coldly, You'll know once you get there. It looked like they were going to take me somewhere and chop me into pieces. Only then did I notice that there were several people gathered outside the bathroom, including Timothy's bodyguards and the bar's owner. The last sentence is probably meant for these people. It was really not appropriate for 2 grown men to be arguing with each other in the bathroom, so I had no choice but to follow his wishes. I followed Timothy into the car and drove all the way to his doorstep. He held my hand from beginning to end and never let go. I tried to break free, but Timothy showed no sign of letting go. When I thought that he had a skin hunger and holding my hand might help alleviate it a little, I gave up and let him hold my hand. I have heard that Timothy has a manor in the west of the city, which occupies most of a hill and faces the sea on one side. Although it was night, it still looked magnificent from outside. Somehow, the surrounding environment gave me an inexplicable sense of familiarity. All the way through the door, Timothy was holding my hand. Occasionally, they separated a little, the wind blew in, and my sweaty palms instantly turned cold. I really wanted to ask him why he brought me here, but when I thought about what I had just promised him in the morning, I immediately fell silent. They walked to the front door and the butler opened it before Timothy let go of his hand. As soon as I entered the door, a white figure suddenly rushed towards me. I had been sitting in the car for too long and was feeling a little dizzy. I lost my balance and was knocked to the ground. The culprit was a snow-white Samoyed. At this moment, it was lying on me, sticking out its tongue and licking the side of my face hard. I smiled helplessly and raised my hand to rub its head. "King, get up." As soon as Timothy spoke, King quickly got off me and circled around him. I asked in amazement, "What is it called?" Timothy seemed to know I would ask this question, and answered quickly, as if he had rehearsed it many times. "King." I nodded in understanding. Yeah, it's such a coincidence that I didn't expect it. I raised my hand and rubbed King's back a few times. Now can you tell me why you brought me here?" Sitting on the sofa, I asked while stroking King's fur while drinking the honey water Timothy brought me. Timothy sat down in the lounge chair, leaned back, and said casually, "I just happened to come across it and brought it back." I don't understand the logic of this sentence. What do you mean by bringing it back, by the way? It makes me feel like a street cat or dog. I rubbed King's head hard. "You know, my illness can flare up at any time." Timothy sat up straight and looked me straight in the eye. "Didn't you say you would help me? So I brought you here in advance to familiarize you with the place, in case I suddenly get sick and you get lost and confused. Not familiar, okay?" It was pitch black outside and I couldn't see anything. I didn't even remember the way, and the house was so big. Timothy seemed to know what I was thinking and stood up and said, "I'll show you around." Timothy said he would take me around, and he really took me around the house. Isn't this kind of thing usually done by the butler? The house is so big that I felt a little tired after walking around it. Timothy glanced at me and said, "I'd love to." Back in the living room, I sat on the sofa and continued playing with King. Timothy turned and walked upstairs. "Just sit for a while. I'm going to take a shower." "Oh, take a shower. Wait, take a shower?" I almost forgot what I came here to do. I immediately felt uncomfortable and as if I was sitting on pins and needles. I was the one who said I would agree to anything Timothy asked for. I was also the one who proposed something and then immediately rejected it. It was me who came up with another feasible solution. When I followed him back, I was mentally prepared. From the moment I entered the door until now, everything was so harmonious that I almost forgot the purpose of coming here. Now that he suddenly said something related to that matter, I felt uncomfortable no matter how I sat. 10. When Timothy came down from the shower, I was looking for something to eat in the refrigerator. Suddenly someone was approaching my back. Timothy held me in his arms and rubbed his head against the side of my neck. The scent of warm shower gel fills my nose. "Are you hungry?" Timothy asked hoarsely. "Fine." I didn't dare move, thinking he must be having a seizure. If it would be better if he holds her like this, then let him hold her. I was stunned for a few seconds. The breathing of the person behind me became heavier, and the touch of him against my back through the bathrobe became more and more obvious. It looked like if I didn't break free, I would end up making the same mistake as last night. I turned around and faced Timothy. He held my arms around me with no intention of loosening them. Instead, he held them even tighter. I raised my eyes and met his gaze. It seemed as if I saw in those dark eyes again the same emotion that puzzled me last night. "I want to go first." Before he could even utter the word shower, he was blocked by Timothy's kiss. The touch between the lips is moist, soft, and slightly aggressive. Forget it, instead of struggling to death, it's better to lie down and enjoy it. I've already followed them in, so if I push open my door now, it would seem like I'm being coy. Timothy has both good looks and a good figure. It's just lust because of your beauty. I'm not at a loss anyway. The ambiguous breathing sounds intertwined and soon drowned out the sound of the refrigerator behind them. I just let Timothy kiss me for a long time, and I was almost unable to stand due to lack of oxygen. Fortunately, Timothy's arms were around my waist to support me, so I didn't slip. He picked me up and placed me on the island in the west kitchen. Just as Timothy reached for the hem of my clothes, two untimely dog barks suddenly rang out in the air. Woof woof! King was smiling and looking at us with curiosity. But Timothy had no intention of stopping. I reached out and grabbed his wrist, stopping him from going any further. Go back to the room, I said vaguely. The next moment, Timothy suddenly picked me up and walked upstairs. While I was half conscious, I heard my cell phone ringing. I couldn't think of anyone else who called me so late at night except my dad, who was calling about George. Timothy picked up my phone irritably and I glanced at it casually. Just as I expected. Let's hang up, I said weakly with a trembling voice. Timothy hung up the phone without saying a word, turned off the phone and threw it to the end of the bed. 11. When I woke up the next day, I was sore all over. There was no one around him, and the person who caused the accident had disappeared long ago. The housekeeper prepared clean clothes for me and arranged for a driver to take me back to my residence in the city center. The house was a coming-of-age gift from my sister. It's a large flat on the top floor of an apartment building in a great location. The house was renovated several years ago, but I waited until my dad brought George home before I moved in alone out of spite. When I got home, I didn't rush to call my dad back, but called my sister first. Jennifer probably wasn't busy, so she immediately took over. Ronald, what did George do to you that you hurt him like that? You didn't answer the phone. Dad was really mad last night. I sighed, omitted the part related to Timothy, and told her the whole story in a nutshell. After hearing this, Jennifer slapped the table and snorted. I knew he would do it sooner or later. You did a good job on this. No, it's not enough. No, sister. I quickly persuaded her. It's better to have less trouble than more. I don't think he will dare to do it again in the future. If Jennifer had taken action, George would not be like last night. Not injured but disabled. By this calculation, that guy even owes me half his life. Okay. Don't contact him anymore. I'll talk to Dad for you. Also, your studio has been closed for a few days? Go there soon. On the other end of the phone, Jennifer's assistant called out carefully, Mr. Fong. I immediately said, okay, I'll be there in a minute. You go do your thing. After hanging up the phone, I packed up and drove to the studio. The outside world has always regarded me as a lazy and dissolute young master. Actually, not entirely true. My glass art workshop is doing very well. Although he fishes for 3 days and rests for 2 days, he doesn't open the door often. But there is always a constant stream of people coming and going. Look, the reservations have only been open for half an hour and the 2 days are already fully booked. Ronald, are you really not going to consider hiring a few employees? The female customer in front of me is a frequent visitor to the studio and also a small internet celebrity. She has also helped me shoot several promotional videos, which received very good responses. Why? There are too many people in your team. Do you want to give me some? The girl immediately became alert. Don't try to poach people from me. I tell you. I shook my head and said with a smile, how could that be? These customers are definitely not enough to recruit people, but I'm lazy, and these are enough to handle it. The girl glanced around and said with a teasing smile, yeah, most people come here just for your face. I smiled and didn't answer. Ronald, are you in love? A girl sitting on my left suddenly asked. I asked in confusion. What do you mean? The girl pointed to the left side of her neck. I quickly picked up the mirror and looked at myself, and sure enough, there was a faint reddish mark on the side of my neck. There are many clients who try to add my contact information and pursue me. Instead of finding reasons to reject them one by one, it is better to take advantage of the situation, tell a little white lie and block it at the source. I raised my lips and said, I guess so. There was wailing all around in an instant. The flamethrower in the hand of the girl who just asked me the question was still on. So I pointed it at her and warned her to change the subject. "Be careful, you will get burned." She finally reacted and yelled, "Oh my God!" 12. After being busy for several days in a row, it was almost dark when I got home that day. I ate something casually and just lay down on the sofa to take a nap when suddenly a strange phone call came in. "Hello." I picked up the phone suspiciously, my voice tired. "Are you home?" Timothy's voice came along with the electric current, with a deep, mellow, and pleasant texture. I woke up immediately, sat up, and said, carefully. Timothy added, "I'm downstairs in your house. How do you know where my home is?" I asked puzzledly. "The driver brought you back last time." I said, "Oh." After saying this, the air was silent for a moment. I hadn't seen him for a few days, and when I heard his voice, I suddenly felt a little nervous. "Would you like me to come up and sit down?" Ah, I was wondering why Timothy came here, and I didn't react for a moment, so I just answered, "Okay." When I walked downstairs and saw Timothy standing under the dim light, it was impossible to refuse, because I was successfully attracted by the Pagani next to him. But my legs and feet were not strong enough and I unconsciously quickened my pace. I kept my eyes fixed on the sports car and asked him, "You came here by yourself?" Will it open?" Timothy's voice sounded beside him. "Certainly." As soon as I finished speaking, Timothy threw the car keys to me and made a please gesture. When I touched this dream car, the tiredness of the whole day disappeared in an instant. I also have a few sports cars and occasionally I race with Charles and his group. Seeing that it was still early, I drove to the hillside on the outskirts of the city as usual. "You don't drive this car often, do you?" I've heard that Timothy has a hobby of collecting sports cars, but I've rarely seen him drive one. A flashy car like this, driving on the street in broad daylight, would definitely attract a crowd of onlookers and people in the circle would be talking about it for days. "Not often. I'm busy." I smiled. Compared to this guy, I am indeed a complete playboy. Leaving the city, the roads are less congested. I couldn't help but step on the accelerator harder. It's a pleasure to drive a good car. As the speed increases, adrenaline starts to be secreted and the feeling of excitement runs through the whole body. But after all, it wasn't my car, so I was relatively restrained and didn't drive too fast. 13. I drove along the familiar road to the halfway point of the mountain and parked the car on the side of the road. After getting off the bus, Timothy asked me, "Do you come here often?" "Yes." I stretched and pointed forward. "Look, what a great view. The scenery halfway up the mountain is really nice. At a glance, you can overlook the night view of the entire city." In the distance, several searchlights changed colors and slowly changed angles, shining over the city. The night deepened, and the air was slightly cool on that early spring evening. I was in a hurry to go out and I was wearing too little. A gust of wind blew and I couldn't help shivering. "Are you cold?" Timothy's voice came from behind me. "Fine." By the time I realized he was actually getting closer to me, Timothy's chest was already pressed against my back. "Hug me and I won't feel cold anymore." Timothy's chin rested on my left shoulder, and his faint fragrance penetrated my nose. My mood became inexplicably strange, and even my heartbeat quickened. After hugging for a long time, the person behind him showed no signs of letting go, and even his breathing became extremely steady. This reaction does not seem like an attack of skin hunger syndrome. Just when I was about to turn around to see if he was asleep, Timothy happened to raise his head. My lips accidentally brushed against the corner of his lips. I was stunned for a moment. Apparently, Timothy hadn't expected this either. Unfortunately, he reacted faster than me and chuckled. "You're so proactive." I quickly turned my face away, broke free from his embrace, and changed the subject. "It's late, let's go back." Timothy drove the way back. After dropping me off at the foot of the apartment building, Timothy showed no intention of getting out of the car. "Didn't you say you wanted to go up and sit down?" "I thought you didn't want me to go." It might be an illusion, but I seemed to hear the grievance in his tone again. I immediately responded, "How come?" Timothy's eyes curved. Next time when you invite me. 14. In the following days, Timothy and I met more and more frequently. Ronald, tell me honestly, have you talked to Timothy? Inside the bar, Charles took me to a corner and questioned me in a low voice. I waved my hands and looked away. How is that possible? Then why did you not drink at all when I asked you out for a drink during this period of time? And you always only stayed for a short while before leaving. Charles's attitude seemed like he wouldn't let me go until he got something out of me. The phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out and saw that it was from Timothy. Will you come tonight? No, really. You're my best friend. How can I not tell you if I'm really dating you? That's right. Charles raised his hand and touched his chin. I replied with a yeah and looked up at Charles and said, let's go. I have something else to do. Charles sputtered behind me. Look, you said you didn't talk. I'm already familiar with the route to Timothy's. The housekeeper politely opened the door for me. King rushed towards me excitedly, and I dodged him skillfully, then squatted down and rubbed his head. Ronald, Timothy is in the study. I thanked him and walked towards the study. The door of the study was half open, and I walked in quietly. I closed the door at the same time to prevent that stupid dog from interrupting me again. Timothy noticed me approaching and stopped what he was doing. He also raised his hand to close the photo frame on the desk. Given our current relationship, it's not to the point where you can pry into my privacy at will. I guess this photo is a treasured thing to him. Since he didn't mean to let me see it, there was no reason for me to ask deliberately. I curled my lips and complained casually. Your home is so far away. It takes a long time to drive here. Timothy raised his lips slightly, walked towards me, and put his arm around my waist. I'll go to your place next time. The familiar kiss went from gentle and tender to strong and fierce. My cheeks were hot from the kiss and my consciousness gradually became blurred. Timothy picked me up and sat me on the table. While moving, my hand accidentally knocked the photo frame to the ground. The frame was turned so the photo was facing up. It is really rude to pry into other people's privacy, but driven by curiosity, I pretended to glance at the ground casually. I was stunned at the first glance, because the person in the photo is me. Timothy apparently noticed my daze, stopped and looked in the direction I was looking. The photo was taken shortly after the studio opened. It was taken by a frequent visitor to my studio, a female internet celebrity who is somewhat famous. I didn't know Timothy at that time. In the photo, I am holding the glass rose that is about to be formed in my left hand, and using the spray gun in my right hand to modify the petals. There was dried red dye on his hands, like blood, evil and bloody. But half of my body was in the sun, my eyes were confused, and the contrast was huge. As soon as this photo was posted, the number of likes quickly exceeded 1 million. The studio was also overcrowded from then on. Timothy bent down to pick up the photo frame, carefully brushed off the dust that seemed to be on it, and put it back in place. His ears seemed to turn red. A guess gradually formed in my mind. Felt like something exploded in my heart. A dense and astringent feeling quickly filled my whole body and my vision began to blur. I leaned over, kissed him, and whispered, "Do you like me?" Well, Timothy gently kissed away the tears from the corners of my eyes. Don't cry. I raised my arms and put my arms around his neck and whispered to him, Timothy, come after me. I kissed his lips. Good. 15. Timothy pursues her as he says, showing full sincerity. The next day, after the studio closed, the glass door was pushed open. Hey, what a rare visitor. I looked up and saw the newcomer and joked, didn't you see the sign on the door? We're closed. What are you doing here? Timothy chuckled and said, it's just a trap. He was making fun of the name I gave to my studio, Trap. After finishing the finishing work, Timothy took me to the underground parking lot. He drove a McLaren here today. When he opened the trunk, a full box of freshly cut roses came into view, and the fragrance was overwhelming. I burst out laughing and pretended to be disgusted and said, isn't it rustic? Timothy looked a little confused. Don't you like it? No. I quickly consoled her. I like it. Wait for me. I'll go to the studio to get some glass vases and put them up when I get back. When I got home, before I had even arranged the flowers, Timothy came up from behind me. Are you sick again? I turned around anxiously to check on him. Timothy fell onto the sofa and pulled me to sit on him. He held the back of my head and kissed me for a while, and the sound of water stains was ambiguous and tender. At this moment, the doorbell rang. I quickly stepped back and said in panic, "It could be my sister, you hide first." With that, I grabbed Timothy's suit jacket and pushed him into the bedroom. I quickly hid the vase that had not been put away yet into the cupboard and put Timothy's shoes into the shoe cabinet. When I opened the door, it was indeed my dear elder sister Jennifer standing outside. "Sister, why are you here?" "I happened to be passing by and stopped by to take a look. Did you buy flowers?" As expected of my sister, she is so alert. "No, it's probably planted downstairs. I can smell it these days." "Oh," Jennifer nodded, and without asking any more questions, she said, "George's birthday is coming up in a few days, and Dad wants to have a big one. You haven't been home for so long. Are you planning to go back this time?" I quickly shook my head. It's not nice to be beaten on such a great day as my birthday. Jennifer leaned against the back of the sofa and laughed for a long time. "Okay, I'm leaving now. You should at least go back and take a look." "No." After my sister left, Timothy immediately popped out of the room. "Leave." I nodded. Timothy kissed my forehead and said, "We're having an affair." I smiled and said nothing. My sister's words just now also reminded me that Timothy's birthday is coming soon. 16. Father seemed to attach great importance to George's birthday. The banquet was grand and many people were invited. Charles also received an invitation. "I'm telling you, you were too soft-hearted last time and didn't do it too gently, allowing George to become so arrogant." On the phone, Charles complained to me angrily. Just now, in front of a group of people, he deliberately brought up the fact that I had a few failed blind dates. Wasn't he just trying to embarrass me? I laughed at him. "Isn't it normal for a girl to look down on you? Who the hell are you on, Ronald? Are you still my best friend? Of course it's your side." I laughed even louder. "Go on. You can still laugh. Your father is very nice to him. He said that this is his son's first birthday after he brought him home, and he will compensate him more in the future, so he gave him a Bentley." I sneered and didn't answer. "Not only that, your father also said that George also has the right of inheritance and that he wants to transfer 5% of the shares under his name to him." I frowned. "He's just a bastard, so he deserves it? How many do you have? This is almost as much as you, right? It's okay. I have my sister to protect me." I comforted him. "I'm just worried about your situation. You and your father didn't have a good relationship to begin with, and now he has a sweet and caring son. How can he care about you in the future? Why would I need him to take care of me?" I sneered. "Jennifer has the final say in the Fong family now. It's only because he's our father that things didn't get so ugly." Charles was also amused by me. Yes, you are awesome. And you have an awesome sister." Charles was right. Old man Fong really thought highly of George. However, he forgot one very important thing. People without brains get nothing. 17. A few days later, George drove his new car around the city, as if to show off to everyone that he was the most favored youngest son of the Fong family. It's just sick. So that night, I was very obedient to Timothy. "Why are you so good today?" I looked up and kissed Timothy on the lips. "Can you lend me that Pagani you drove last time? It's not that I don't have luxury cars, they're just not that luxurious." Timothy also attended the birthday party that day. He knew a little about my family and guessed it right away. He leaned his head on my shoulder and laughed for a long time. "Just for this." I felt a little embarrassed, so I turned my face away and asked in a low voice, "Will you lend it to me?" Timothy pressed me down and kissed me for a while, then said, "I'll give it to you." "What?" I was confused. Timothy raised his hand and pinched my face. I quickly slapped it away and said in disgust, "Is it dirty? You think your car is dirty? I'll tell you, I'll give you the car. Go to the basement and look around to see if there's anything else you like. I'll give you all of them." Happiness went to my head, and I immediately wanted to jump out of bed and run to the underground garage to check out. But Timothy pulled me back and pressed me on the bed, saying angrily, "Let's go tomorrow. TSK, the night is long." The next day, I drove Timothy's Pagani to attend a friend's club opening dinner. The car immediately attracted everyone's attention. Few people came up to me at the scene and asked me where the car came from. They all guessed that it was sponsored by my sister. But my sister definitely knows it's not the case. So she, who is always well informed, called me immediately and asked me where the car came from. "It belongs to a friend. I just borrowed it to open it." "You're making such a fuss about it, but you're just borrowing it?" Jennifer seemed angry. "Whose friends is it?" I hesitated for a long time, gritted my teeth, and told her, "Timothy's." Jennifer's voice suddenly rose 3 degrees. "Who? Timothy? Well, you are a traitor, aren't you?" "Sister, I was wrong." I apologized quickly. "Huh, it's too late. Just wait for me," Jennifer said and hung up the phone. However, I didn't expect that my sister asked me to wait, but what I ended up waiting for was a Bugatti. I was still a little confused when I took the key from Jennifer. "Humph, this car is more expensive than Timothy's. Why don't you try to cheat me again?" "I am grateful and grateful. Sister, you are my biological sister. My only sister. The best sister in the world." Jennifer smiled happily. "Of course. Haha. I wonder if my sister would still laugh so happily if she knew that I was going to be with Timothy." Timothy never liked to celebrate his birthday with much fanfare. His parents travel abroad all year round, and on his birthday, the couple was spending the cool autumn in the southern hemisphere. So I suggested early on that I would accompany him. I have arranged everything. The gifts will be at their most beautiful when witnessed by the blues moment after the sun sets. Unfortunately, the weather was not good and it rained heavily that day. I've been worrying all day about the gifts being heavily discounted. Fortunately, the rain stopped near dusk. It seems that God still recognizes me as his grandson. Everything was ready, so I called Timothy and asked him when he would be back. Right there, 5 minutes. After hanging up the phone, I suddenly became nervous. I was worried that he wouldn't like the gift I prepared. But now that it has come to this, we will know whether it is a mule or a horse by taking it out for a walk. With this feeling in mind, I opened the door to Timothy. "Happy birthday!" Timothy hugged me in his arms, kissed my cheek, and said, "Thank you." We kissed briefly in the hallway, and King kept circling around us. Okay, I'll take you to see the surprise I prepared for you." I was worried about missing the best opportunity, so I quickly withdrew from his arms. "Let me make it clear first, you are not allowed to say you don't like it, and you have to pretend to do it." Timothy smiled and said, "I like it. Wait a minute, don't rush." I pulled him into the house. When we passed by the dining table, Timothy pointed at the sumptuous food on the table and asked me, "You did all this?" I looked up proudly and said, "Of course, I'm a great cook. Cake too." No, the cake is bought. Come with me quickly." Timothy couldn't persuade me, so he had to follow me to the door of a room facing west. I looked out the window and it was just the right time. "Want to go in and take a look?" I asked expectantly. Timothy opened the door and walked into the room at a slower pace. "Happy birthday, Timothy." I hugged him from behind and leaned on his back. "This is our special blue hour." The sun had just set and the sky, washed by rain, was a clear ultramarine blue, gorgeous and gentle. Under the deep blue light, several Louis XIV roses made of fired glass extend from the room to the large floor-to-ceiling windows, beautiful and gorgeous. Flowers have a shelf life, glass doesn't, and my love for you has no shelf life either. Timothy turned around, bent down and kissed me. "Neither do I." "You should say I don't have any either," I corrected him. "I don't have any either." "Do you like it?" I asked. "Like." We gave each other a very long kiss during this grand and romantic cosmic farewell.